All right.
Hi.
Good evening, everybody. And to everybody joining us online, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started with our artist talk with Mairin-Taj. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. It's actually a pleasant evening outside, which is good.
Yeah.
A lot of the snow and ice is gone, so it feels a little bit better getting out. So we're happy that you're with us. And those of you joining us from home, we're happy you are giving us your evening and spending some time with us. So we are here with artist Mairin-Taj Caya. We are going to be talking about her current exhibition titled Speak the Dark. And we try to keep these artist talks like really informal and really conversational. And so if you have questions along the way, or if there's something you'd like to know, just feel free, like we can pause the conversation midway and you can ask that question or you can hang on to it until later. But yes, Mairin-Taj, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's exciting. I've actually never done a setup like this, so I'm a little nervous, but I think it'll be okay.
It's gonna be good. So why don't we just get right into it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been such a pleasure getting to live with your work for coming up on 2 months. It's crazy that it's like we're soon going to be danced on this exhibition. It's always a bittersweet moment because we get to know them and we feel like they're like part of the gallery, and then when they come off the walls, it's like this shocking moment where everything's empty for a moment, and then new things come in, which is great. But we've been really enjoying our time with your works, and we feel like there's so much to talk about.
Oh, wonderful.
So, firstly, I'd like to know kind of more about the title, like "Speak the Dark." Where did this come from? If you could kind of talk to the conceptualization of, like where that title came from, but also like kind of what these works represent for you.
Yeah. So "Speak the Dark" was a phrase that sort of came out of in the past couple of years, I've been rediscovering myself as an artist and dredging some of my layers as to what my purpose was and what I was most drawn to as a creative and as a storyteller. And so, I've never worn this mask before, it's a little weird. The work that I was willing to kind of pull up that had to do with figurative work and the relationship to nature and a lot of the tumultuous things that are going on in the world, the COVID experience, the sense of loss and the sense of overwhelm and the paradigm shifts that we're really going through as a culture was something that kind of triggered some things in me. And so "Speak the Dark" is me bringing to light a lot of hidden, more personal, subjective storytelling that actually relates to the grander picture, the collective story that we're all experiencing through my, perspective as a woman in this world. Yeah.
I just think just 3 words like "speak dark." It has a power in that, which I think is really special.
Yeah.
And when people kind of walk the gallery, and like a lot of people, so like a funny aside, when people come in, it's always interesting to see which direction they kind of traverse the gallery first. Like some people will start back here, other people will start there.
Yeah.
But I would say the majority of the people who come in and see the show start back here.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it's really great because they take the time to read the wall text, and then they look at the exhibition, and like when they come away from the wall, they're like, "Oh, I get it," which is it's awesome. And as artists, like we don't always get to hear like how our work is received because we can't be there like watching it 24/7.
Yeah.
But kind of a unique perspective that Nicole and I have, that people will enter the space, but sometimes we're almost like a fly on the wall, where like they get really into the work and they have conversations with each other, and like we get to overhear, or sometimes they ask us questions. It's really great to see the response to the work.
I wonder if the cup had anything to do with directing people.
Perhaps there's just this little object that catches your attention. People have really reacted to that too. Like they see this.
Yeah.
And people have made the comment that it feels like this space is kind of like an extension of your workspace, and particularly having the sketchbook, having the object like the rose on the wall, like these kind of orbiting pieces that surround the work, but I would imagine are around us all the time as we make work. It's cool to bring it into the space. But But you had mentioned, your interest in storytelling. I wonder if you can kind of expand on that a little bit too. Like, how important is story to you, and do you feel like through your works, are you telling a collective story? Are you interested in like kind of pulling from here and there and everywhere to kind of create your own? Like, what is that experience like for you?
Well, actually, I went to PCAD over here actually years ago, and I wasn't sure what I was going to major in, but I've been drawing since I was 3, and just kind of coming up with stuff off the top of my head, my imagination kind of paving the way, as it were. And so when I came to PCAD, I decided to devote myself to the denomination of illustration, which was like, story-based communicative arts. But over time, that kind of turned into, like, professionally, I wasn't really that drawn to it. I just kind of felt like the visual arts was a way to communicate, whether it was fine art, graphic design, what have you. And the story aspect for me has always just been connecting myth, connecting this human saga that we all have, the relationship we have to the world and each other, the things that we can open ourselves up through telling and open to each other telling, is all about story. Like, that's what story is for me. So I'm like inhaling my mask. So story is the vehicle, the ultimate point really is storytelling. Telling each other our stories so that we can connect and make better positive changes in the world. And I think that myth is this inheritance that we all have of our history, our future, where we're going, why we're doing what we're doing. And it's a kind of way to kind of tell the little secrets along the way to one another. So myth is something that I allude to in all. And I'm also kind of along the way making my own mythology, making my own sort of visual vocabulary. Pieces like Blessing the Water touches on an ancient tale of the woman processing her sorrows and her losses through life, and connecting through water. Processing that is very visceral, because water is known to be this keeper of knowledge, this record, this way of holding information. It's almost like an inheritance in itself. So a shapeshifter of knowledge, as it were. So the connection between the woman and the water is very much about the human story and the story through that on Earth. And how a lot of Native Americans these days are going, look, we have to connect to water more because everything going on in the world. So knowledge, water, memory, mystery, that's all there. And I think that these themes of loss, of memory, of life, of rebirth, of hope, they're all kind of connected. This piece, Hathor and Shakti, it's actually fully titled Self-Portrait as Hathor and Shakti. So it's this examination of a lot of tumultuous things that have been changing for me. This relationship I have with the mother aspect, the matriarchal aspect of myself, and also the creator, the playful, childlike manifester, the artist aspect of myself. And Hathor is like this ancient Egyptian archetype, the great mother, the protector and the creator and the cultivator and the nurturer. And Shakti is this ancient Hindu concept of play and the ultimate creative force, manifestation. So these two things are embracing here, these elements of myself are embracing, and sort of almost interchangeable allies to one another. And within that, set within just this natural landscape, this idea of a stormy but abundant natural world. Possibility is there, but also the changeability of the world is there. So these things kind of are throughout this idea of myth, this idea of storytelling, and kind of modernization of mythology as well. So I think I can answer that question best if I just like
Yeah.
go through a little
it's
bit
great.
of everything.
Absolutely.
This piece, The Fates, Sisters Incarnate, kind of talks to this idea of the three, the trifecta, the past, present, and future, the possibility for foretelling what may come, but not necessarily what will absolutely be. And I grew up fascinated by my connection to my Celtic ancestry, and simultaneously fascinated by mythos, especially Native American, Iroquois nation. So these women are hearkening back to this sort of essential archaic wisdom that mostly the women, the matriarchs, have been passing down in our cultures around the world. And this idea of the keepers of what has been, what is now, and what could be. Not necessarily what will be, but what could be. And they're just sort of stoically holding space for that. So the fates. And I think that they're not really about any particular time. It's not like a telling of the past, or they're not supposed to necessarily represent any particular era. They're just ever present. This thread represents that Hindu concept of tugging on the thread of hope and always reaching out for that tug, that thread of hope.
That's particularly interesting to me because, like, when I read the fates, like the fates show up across like multiple cultures. Like,
Yeah.
it seems like they just kind of appear.
It's the global
phenomenon. And one of them always has a thread tied around their finger. They're known as the spinner. Mm-hmm. You have the allottor and the inflexible. So the spinner kind of creates your destiny. The allottor decides like how that destiny will be lived out, and then the inflexible like sets it to stone. Like it just becomes this thing that can't change.
Right. Especially in the Roman, was it the Greek?
Yeah, the Greek particularly. But so when I saw the thread, I was like, oh, okay. So we have the spinner, the allottor, and the inflexible. So it's cool that like your reasoning for the thread around the finger is completely different than the one that I was taking it as.
Yeah.
But it still lines up with what these three women represent throughout other cultures and histories.
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating.
I think that there's definitely a lot of that with my work too, is if I'm hearkening to anything mythological, it's not specifically because I love myth and I just want to like re-illustrate it, in my way. I want to take it and play with it a little bit and maybe make some allusions that those who are looking for it might notice, And I like the idea of mixing things up because you just see that around the world. Different cultures will have threads of the same concept. And I think that's because it's the universal threads, this idea we've had for as long as we've been around, of things like the way that time and space affects human lives.
Yeah, life and death and everything that happens in between.
Right.
For the longest time too, like before we had like true written languages, like the spoken word was what passed information around, and I think oftentimes story kind of built a momentum to kind of keep that going until things could be recorded. But then when the written word happens, like it's just as easy to go back and strike through things that you no longer want to carry on, and you can rewrite it. So things are always in flux. Yeah, the retelling always changes.
Yeah. And that's one way that we participate too.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So seeing the decisions that you're making in your drawings and your paintings are fascinating, and like as I said before, we don't often get the opportunity to kind of like walk through the space with the artist and be like, what's this mean? What's that mean? So you kind of draw your own conclusion. But hearing, where things like hit the mark, like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking is really great. And then seeing where they diverge is also how that's even cooler.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little leery of completely explaining everything that goes into everything I do, because I think that I like to leave it up to the viewer a little bit, participate in your own way. That's a way that you can kind of continue the story. And also, I don't want to impose my perspective on the audience, because everyone's different. Some people are like, I've made a relationship with this piece. I don't really need to know what you've been thinking, So that's also something I'm open to, because that is part of the storytelling, I think.
Absolutely, it's part of the storytelling. And so, we're really fortunate to have Mairin-Taj's sketchbook in the show, and it has been just like this never-ending like gift. Like we'll change a page every couple of days to kind of keep it fresh, and it's just like this. I mean, that to me is like every page is a piece that may as well be like taken out and framed and celebrated as a
We
finished
can do
piece.
a bunch of these.
Yeah, my gosh. But like your sketchbook is gorgeous.
Thank you.
But these like the writing components that you have along with them, I think are really fascinating too. And just I mean, even your handwriting itself is aesthetically pleasing. And some of them, like the ones that are upside down, I'm not gonna like kind of crane my head or flip the book upside down and read them. I just accept it as like a continuation of the drawing almost.
Sure, right, yeah, almost a graphic element.
Absolutely, like a graphic element. But we are fortunate to have a couple pieces that have the sketches selected, like partnered or paired with the the final piece, as you'd say.
Yeah.
What would like, and this was an idea that you brought to us and said, hey, look, I have these sketches. I'd like to show them with the original piece. Like, can you talk a little bit about the maybe your reasoning behind that, or just like how you feel? Like are they their own things? Like do you like how do you feel about that whole process?
Yeah. Well, I do remember we talked about that, and one of my earliest ideas was that the show kind of let you into my space or my vibe a little bit. Even though it's not my physical studio, we bring in the cup, which is something that I have on my desk a lot. And we bring in the sketchbook itself and the rose. And also, I just wanted to, I really like seeing people's process, or it's not even the full process, but like hints at it, just so that you can sort of work into it a little bit. And so I thought it'd be cool to show a little bit of my initial stage and then something that is close to complete. Close to. I mean, I would say that this is its own completed painting. That's done. I'm not going to add to it at any point, but one of my Speak the Dark as a series is actually an ongoing series. It's not completed. This show is not the culmination of the concept. It's an ongoing series that I am actually adding to. So, for instance, this final drawing, which is a completed drawing, and that came from a little mini thumbnail, will become a larger painting. And this is also going to become a bigger painting. And the one in the end there is, that's an intermediate piece. That's also going to get bigger, and there's going to be more put into it. So what's fun to me is knowing that like I show this and then the painting, but what is currently finished on the walls of this show is actually not finished. There's more to it. So you're seeing more of the process in that sense as well, knowing just that this is not the end. But I think we can all understand that no artist is ever done, and if you're done, then you might as well really be done.
You may as well. Yeah, you may as well really be done. Yeah.
So I'm excited to see where things go from here. For instance, the Rose Offerings series, these 5x5s on the wall, they will be continued. So there are 13 of them. I did 13, the number 13 for a reason. And there are 5x5 dimensions also for a reason, for the rose, because the rose with the 5. But I'm going to add to those. I think I might do 33 of them in total. So they're still coming at you. If you are drawn to some and you're sad that maybe one of them is sold, maybe another one will come up in the future that's similar. Who knows? That's a fun experience for me. The roses, I'll just add while I'm on them.
Yeah.
It's called Rose Offerings, and they are a garden of love, and they are a manifestation and a celebration of this idea of the garden as the place of love, or cultivating love. It's a concept of what love means, to cultivate and to grow and to change and to honor what is past, what dies, what fades, and what comes up again. So the roses are sort of like a labor of love for me, and a reminder of growth and beauty and love and the trials and tribulations that come from it, even in the depths of winter, the dark of winter, like the dark from which I've created this whole series. So it all kind of ties together, these concepts of light and dark, and the direction of light is also very important in a lot of these works.
I also associate, like a potential for pain with roses. I mean, like, Dan, if you've ever pricked your finger on a rose thorn, like that's a very specific type of pain.
It smarts.
It does. But like kind of just as you said, like the garden is a place of this cultivation of love. Like you plant the seed, you tend to it, something grows. Eventually, it will come to its peak and then pass away, and then something else comes back from that. I mean, there's joy and beauty in that. There's also a great deal of risk and pain and loss that come with that too. And sometimes I just feel like that, like the thorn on that is like the rose is like a very perfectly.
It's a great symbol.
It's a symbol, absolutely, and I think that's why it's endured for so long. But it's been used that way for so long.
That, and also it's been around and cultivated by humans the longest of any other medicinal plant or herb, and we have a relationship with it. We give to it; it gives to us. It's medicine, or anything in the Rosaceae family is very medicinal. So I think the medicine of the rose has a lot of meanings. There's layers to it. It's not just a pretty little thing that you give someone that you have a crush on.
I think it's really been significant right now. Like we're still in the throes of the pandemic. There's a lot to be like anxious about in the world, and then that can lead to frustrations and aggression and just like I mean, we see it every day. Like things are happening, people are acting out. Like there's still a lot of like stress and friction, exactly. So being able to come in and like see like the rose offerings and like if you take a look at the wall text first and then you enter that, you're like, oh my gosh, like this I can feel this artist's like compassion. I mean, you made these since we came up with the idea for the exhibition and you started to work. So it's not like you've already had like 8 of these waiting.
No.
It's like you made these with the intent of putting them in this exhibition. And you made them, I think, also with the intent that people are going to like connect with them, and their size makes you stand close to them. You can view them from across the room, but they beg you to get closer. And it's nice to see something thoughtfully made and beautiful. And like you're talking about the rose is like a medicinal plant. Like sometimes just seeing something like that is medicine enough. You're like, oh, okay, there are still nice things in the world. Like I can come and appreciate art, and I can see a space, and I can just like breathe for a second and feel good about it, and then I can go back out and face more. Or we are also in the position where you made them in a way that are very accessible to people, and they can take that and then give that to somebody else.
Right, little treasures to appreciate at home. Well, I think there's a lot to be said for in the storytelling of art. There's so much space for therapy and peace, laying of ghosts, and so that's a part of this series too, for sure. And it's going to keep growing. So that's exciting. And then the big one at the end.
Let's talk about Rosary. I think that's a piece that could probably carry a pretty good conversation.
There is much in this, and as excited as I was with that little sketch there at the top left corner, really, when I did that, I did that in this sketchbook here, and I got that little sketch down, and I knew I hit upon something that I wanted to chase, and then when I got the painting down, I wanted to do it in a way that kind of reflected almost like a old,
Mairin-Taj, don't go too far because our guest back here can't hear you.
Oh, okay. An old artifact, like a ancient relic maybe that's been discovered and gingerly framed, and I will be making that into a much larger piece. Sort of like I wanted it to have this like old crumbling mural effect, like something you might have found in an old crumbling building or on a wall somewhere. But yeah, Rosary, this continuation of the rose offerings theme is speaking to the great mother, the great matriarch, the female aspect of all life, which is just, part of it, of course. And in these tumultuous times, with everything changing and going on, I wanted to almost acknowledge her and almost appeal to her and almost see her not engaging with us, the audience, but looking away, noticing trauma, noticing problems, notice on the horizon that things are burning, things are not looking so hot. And she's watchful, but she's not necessarily stepping in. And I think that a lot of that has to do with what we can offer to her and what we can offer to ourselves in these times. The rose offerings are around her, like she's in kind of a garden and an offering of roses. And almost the wall beneath her, there's like a scribed rose motif, which is also an ancient geometric symbol. So there's just layers of it, acknowledging through all of this time of history, human history, the saga of like the ever presence of the female spirit. And I think women these days in this paradigm shift of our culture are starting to push the narrative a bit more, and we're trying to return to, or maybe just remember, this inner knowing of how we can be more integrated with nature, our inner nature and our outer nature, the nature of Earth and the nature of ourselves. And I think this female aspect has a lot to do with that. There's a lot of layers there. So this is a bit of a
it's a heavy piece.
There's an homage to it, yeah. And there's a lot that hasn't really been gotten at yet. As an artist, for me, there's a lot more to dig into. So I think that will come yet.
That's so exciting, isn't it? Like as an artist, like making something that you like, oh my gosh, there's so much more here. Like the excavation that can happen.
Yeah.
And the iterations, the series of it. Like, I mean, it'll just keep giving back to you, and I think that's such an awesome thing when it comes to making art.
Yeah, like you said, excavation. I think art isn't just. I think it's both self-expression, but it needs to be more than that. There needs to be more than that, because from just self-expression, you don't really get necessary connection or transformation. And what aids that is self-excavation. So the artist, not just expressing themselves, but really doing the work of knowing where they're coming from, what moves them, and why they're telling stories, why they're putting that into the world, what the point of that is. And from that comes transformation.
Yeah.
Like, connection with others, people gaining that therapy that they need, or that release, or that sense of being seen by someone else. Me as an artist feeling seen, or me connecting and showing something to someone that can then feel seen. And that is a gateway. It's a way of opening all of us to transformation. And I think that's really important.
I wrote something in this text that I think really fits with what you just said. Enchanting and educating, her visual expressions feel ancient, familiar, yet somehow contemporary and fresh. And her drawings and paintings tell of people, places, and objects that we can't help but feel connected to, even when meeting them for the first time. Like you said, like just as you said a moment ago, like self-expression, I don't think is quite enough. Yeah. There has to be more than just saying this is how I feel. Like you have to be. I shouldn't say you have to be, but right. It's helpful when you're sharing how you feel, but inviting that conversation back.
Yeah.
That's what makes that connection. It can be, I think a lot of us have seen artworks that we see and we take in and we're like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And you move on. And maybe that's because you're not, like, it's not meeting you halfway. So I think, just as you said, like, there needs to be more connection to it. And I think that's what brings you in, and that's what brings people into to linger with your pieces and spend more time with them. And kind of peel back the layers and find that story for themselves.
What relates to them.
Absolutely.
For sure. Because I don't in any way expect everyone to resonate with what I'm making or trying to pass along or tell, because that would be ridiculous. That would be absolutely absurd of me. But I do think, and I think, who is it? James Victori has said this many, many times. Great graphic designer and artist and teacher, and he says, "In the particular lies the universal." So when we can, and this doesn't have to go just for artists, visual artists, or any other kind of artists, but when we can, as people, understand for ourselves where we're coming from and what we're about, what moves us, what gets us agitated and like shaking and moving in the world, and when we share that, our particularness, we can actually better relate and find common ground with other people. And I think that that's what actually moves the world forward, makes change and progress, which is what we need. So I always find it refreshing when I see I also have a role as a professor at Pennsylvania College of Art and Design, and I think it's so amazing when a young artist finally just throws the curtain off and is like, all right, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna put myself out and see what happens. Or they'll often say I've not done something like this before, but I figure I should try it. That's really, really exciting stuff. It's exciting and it's interesting too, because even just your body language is kind of encapsulated how nerve-wracking and anxious that can be. And there's this wonderful documentary called Beauty is Embarrassing. And it's a documentary about an artist called Wayne Wright, I believe. And I think it's from 2012, but I watched that a while ago and it just hit me because I subscribe to this idea how as creatives, we can be so tender and precious with what's going on inside in the dark, in those darker realms. But it takes a lot of courage and a lot of almost, neglect of the ego to just bring it out into the world and say, I don't know what I made, but maybe this can offer something.
Yeah. I usually feel better after I do that.
It's such a release.
If I carry around too much stuff, I feel heavy.
Yeah.
And I'm just God, I just gotta get this out. And when I find time to be up in the studio and just put it down onto paper, I'm
that's
great.
What that was. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you can share it with other people and not feel not feel that vulnerability, I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah.
And when I look at these pieces, I don't see I don't see any vulnerabilities in them. They're just these oh my god, you nailed it on that one. Oh, look at this one. You can't help but technically walk around and you admire them for their technical ability, and then you appreciate them for what they are saying beyond that. But to me, every one of these pieces is bulletproof.
Oh, thank you.
And it's awesome. It's totally awesome.
That's so funny. I've heard a lot of artists tell me you're so technically whatever, and I'm I just always chuckle at that, because for me, this is just for me, but I would identify myself as a very intuitive creator. I would not consider myself terribly analytical or academic with any of my work.
Well, I think that's fair. These pieces don't feel overworked. Sometimes you can approach a piece that's really technically amazing, but it just looks tortured. And it's just oh my gosh, that must have been painstaking. They're I'd almost say they're effortless, but I know that's not the case.
No.
But they, when you say you're an intuitive maker, I believe that. I believe that the pencil, particularly your graphite pieces, I feel your pencil takes you in a direction and you follow it. Yeah. And you have this confidence that however whatever the direction your hand is about to make, you'll be able to make sense of that mark and integrate it into the piece without it being a total disaster. Or being this thing that you can't pull back from and repair. But I can totally see the meander of that pencil point across, from the beginning up in the one corner to the very bottom. And it's
a discovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making this water was, I always like to start with the knowns in anything I do, and then I just let the unknowns kind of take their course when I get to them. So the water here, I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to go about doing that. I was excited. I wasn't feeling like trepidatious or anything, but there was this sense of like, well, we'll figure it out when we get there. And that process was very meditative. It was very freeing that I could allow myself to just not know. Oh, I was going to swear.
You can do that, yeah.
Okay. But I think that that's essential too. At least for me as a creative, I have to give myself that leeway to just, let it come and to not be too intellectual about the technique anyway.
Yeah, or controlling of it.
Yeah.
Because like you can sometimes get a death grip on your piece and it just chokes the life out of it.
Yeah, stifles it.
So
Yeah.
being susceptible to like I know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to let the piece talk to me as well.
Yes, it has to be a relationship.
Absolutely, a relationship is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I do feel like my graphite drawings are more strong for sure because I've been, like I said, drawing since I was 3 years old.
Do you have any of your drawings from when you were 3?
My parents do, yes. The whole basement is just stacked full of papers and folders and sketchbooks. I'd like to go, I should go through them again. Actually.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, maybe make like a piece now from one of my older concepts. I did a lot of, from imagination, I did a lot of drawings of like naked women running through the forest. That kind of thing. Again, the female perspective, nature, freedom. That's very important.
Does that have I want to we've talked a lot about what's been going on with this body of work and a lot of the now.
Yeah.
But like you said, growing up, you women running through the woods. Did you grow up in a rural place? Were you surrounded by nature as a child?
Yes, I grew up in Western New York. I say that slowly because down here when I say it, people think I'm saying Western New York. I don't know why. But near Buffalo, but in a little town called East Aurora. So it was like this little artsy town. If you've ever heard of the Roycroft movement, that's where that's from. And it was just valleys, forests, and I would run through the forests barefoot, pretending to be Pocahontas. Again, my love for native cultures. Do you have a question?
I was just curious, going back to the mythology you were talking about at the beginning, are there particular mythologies that you find more generative that kind of give you more to work with in your work?
I'm so fascinated by mythology as a whole, and especially in a philosophical sense that I'm always learning and studying, and I just want to gobble all of it up. But because of my ancestry, my connection to specifically Celtic mythos, and I'm a full-on Celt, so I really relate to that, and I have since I was very young. That has really been a driving force for me. In fact, before college, at college, and then just slightly after, I was mostly doing stuff that was inspired by Breton culture and Irish culture and Scottish culture, and I did a lot of intricate Celtic weavings on illustrations and stuff with Cernunnos and Bridget and all of that. So yeah, that was a really big thing for me. And I focused in book illustration, so I was actually gonna do a lot of Celtic storytelling in that sense for a while, but that's on hold right now.
Kind of going back to what kind of brought you to this moment as you are now, as you are here with us. You mentioned in your own little bio, let's see, you've been a dancer, wilderness guide, student, model muse, tutor, designer, gardener, and nomad.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of things. I'd like to know, how do all those experiences kind of come back into your studio practice, and does that have a impact on what you find yourself creating in your studio?
Yeah, those are a lot of things, and those are not all of the things. I came to my career as an artist, as a visual artist, in a very roundabout way, which is why I think I hold fast to how I identify as a very intuitive artist. I'm not one of those who draws 24/7 or goes to ateliers and all that. Again, I think all through my life I was playing outside, or I was studying primitive wilderness skills with a woman, Denise Ashman, who trained with the Aborigines for 20 years of her life. And my brother and I would build debris shelters out in the forest and sleep out there alone. And make fire and tell stories that were passed down through the generations. And these things were just sort of ways of connecting to my ancestry and to that great, the saga of humanity. And it was a way for me to relate to myself and to identify with myself. And I think that, what else was in there? Like modeling.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Modeling,
gardener. Yeah, I went to Waldorf school, so I have a very weird upbringing, like we were called the Walnuts by the local public school kids because we were just so strange. I think I've always just identified with, that little naked woman running through the forest. I think that was very essential for me. And I like to put that wild, natural, sort of childlike part of me into everything I do. Because, among other reasons, I think that in the people that I get to know and meet anyway, we seem to crave that return to the wild, that intrinsic sort of inner knowing, self-embracing, loving quality. Just being able to go, to be free in yourself and to not have these, social and red taped restraints about how we want to live and be in the world. So I'm very naturalist in that sense. That's one reason why I really connect with Celtic mythos, and also with a lot of native culture and mythology, because both of them have a strong naturalist bent. Their spirituality is very nature-based, seasonal, and so that was kind of how I was brought up, and that's something that I really resonate with. So that's in a lot of ways.
Awesome, I love it.
Yeah, I feel like I should mention the 2021 was a year where I was doing a lot of seasonal and landscape-based studies in watercolor. And then also as a figurative artist, working with the figure is something that I've always been interested in. I was also a dancer, so the figure is essential for me in that sense, really connects to the somatic side of my personality and my interests. And this past year, I noticed the correlation of the outer corporeal, topographical landscape world and the inner landscape. So this idea of the emotional landscape, what we go through, how we're feeling with ourselves, how disjointed we might be with ourselves and with others. So that kind of correlation between the inner and the outer landscapes was something I was really fascinated by, and I started digging into last year and then this year. And I'm going to be expanding on that moving forward. So.
Look like we might have a question.
Yeah, I just had a question. Could you expand a little bit on your figure references? You mentioned the figure and being into the figure and being a dancer. Can I ask, as far as technical references go, how do you make that happen? I know you lean towards intuitive, but there's a lot of really well-researched anatomy in your work too.
Thank you. Yeah. I think part of that is since I've been drawing, especially people, since I was 3, I think I've put in a lot of hours learning the anatomy, just because of natural interest. I did focus on that at school as well. And then as a dancer, I'm also an art model, so I get movement pretty well. That's just a natural, I guess, bent for me. But in these works, I tend to use myself as figure reference. So again, being an artist and an art model, having been an art student, I can do that pretty well. It's something that I cannot just get. So that's one reason why I show up in my pieces. It's not that I always want to focus on me, but I think I am leaning in a semi-autobiographical approach to my work. And also sometimes it's just the most efficient thing to do, I don't have, too many resources, and living the life of an artist can be really challenging. So one thing that makes that less complicated for me is just being able to, I took a folding chair out in my backyard and I sat in it, and I do have this corset because I worked at the Ren Fair. And I just sat there, and my partner photographed me with the sunset in the background.
There you go.
And I turned that into, the mermaid. This was all, just from the mind.
Invented.
Well, I did use some photo reference with like scales, but yeah.
But you're not messing around with like pin spotting.
No. Yeah, that was just, again, very like the water, very meditative, just kind of, almost just pattern making, So, yeah. And that comes with these as well. Like this woman is me wearing a wool yoga blanket just wrapped around me. And this is my crazy hair. And I just, shot that in my studio on my phone, nothing fancy. And you don't need like a fancy setup to get by. You really don't. I don't think some students they don't do something because they don't have it all figured out. Like, oh, I don't have a studio to do a photo shoot in. I can't do that.
You don't need one.
No.
You just need enough space so you can get like a full body photo of yourself, like doing what you want to do, and then you go for it.
Exactly. You don't need a spotlight with special rigging or anything. Just have someone like hold a lamp in your face. You need whatever you needed to do to get the right lighting. But yeah, and these women, just me wrapping myself in a blanket. So very, very basic in that sense.
Yeah, so Steve had a question in the chat here, and well, a really sweet comment too. I'll read it aloud.
Okay.
I'm really excited to read there. So Steve said your work has an impact on me, both the graphite and the painting.
Oh.
Can you speak a bit about your process, touching on how and why you incorporate the acrylic and watercolor? Oh, and I've also appreciated seeing the preliminary sketches.
Nice.
I feel like seeing that insight of the process, like you mentioned. You as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. At Waldorf School, we had to paint veil paintings, layer paintings in watercolor, and I hated it. I wanted nothing to do with it. Didn't touch watercolor until college when we had to start playing around methods and materials classes, and I just picked it up. I don't even remember what the incentive was, but I picked it up and I made a painting based on a Celtic concept. And I worked on it all night and I fell in love with it. It just transformed me for whatever reason. And so ever since then, I've been focusing on water-based media, primarily watercolor. And over time, growing with my interests in doing something a little bit more opaque, I did train a little bit in oils, but not too much. And so sometimes I layer in acrylics just as a way to play with the opacity and the texture of the paint, which I really enjoy. And it's me trying to figure out how I want to move forward into painting, because as I said, I've been drawing since I was 3, so I'm really very comfortable with that. And I'll continue to explore my drawing, but now I'm trying to kind of meet the level of my drawing with my painting. So I'm very experimental with my painting at this stage. And I like what I've been making, like the roses were really fun. Every single one was just a one-off, like, okay, what am I gonna do now? So it's a very experimental phase that I'm in.
But also like just technically speaking, the relationship between watercolor and acrylics go really well because they're both water-based media.
Yeah.
So you can lay down those really delicate layers with watercolor. You can also achieve those with acrylic if you water them down enough.
Right.
But the acrylics give you this really they give you the extremes. The watercolor can give you the most faintest of color shift, where the acrylic you can build it as heavy as you choose. And they don't fight against one another.
No.
You can even go back over an acrylic with watercolor, and the watercolor will find the areas where the watercolor didn't, or where the acrylic didn't quite grab.
Yeah.
And it'll fill in that information. So
they're very compatible.
They are. They are really compatible, and that could be a great thing to know when you're getting in there and trying to do things for yourself. It can really. You could easily find yourself like, oh my gosh, I'm neck deep in this piece, and I've used materials that don't work well together, and I guess I've learned from my mistake now. But
yeah.
Watching somebody do something, and you're like, oh, a lot of people have commented, watercolor and acrylic, really?
Really?
Yes, watercolor and acrylic, huh?
That's interesting.
And the relationship that you struck with it is gorgeous, and it's almost seamless. It's tough to tell which one's what, which I think is also
that's very fun.
testament to your skill.
That's really interesting. I would not have thought people would have that reaction, but yeah. And I mean, I'm most comfortable with paper, again, because of the drawing thing. So a lot of what some pieces I'm not even sure what it's going to be. It is a drawing, and then I decide I want to add watercolor, and then it gets layered on top of that. This piece is very much one of those works where it was so experimental and exploratory. I knew the composition and the layout, like I understood what the content of it was, but how I got there in terms of color was very playful, and I really, really enjoyed that. And I put watercolor where I thought I'd like it, and I put acrylic where I thought it would work, and I just kind of like scrubbed it in. I got very hands-on with it, and it just, that's how it ended up, and I was very happy with it being a very, sort of graphic piece in that sense. So, yeah, play, experiment.
Yeah, play and experiment.
Yeah. And then go from there, like, don't stop. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
I think you expressed some reluctance to dissect it, but it's just such a rich piece. Could you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very open to, like, I'm very receptive to what you might want. So, like, if you would like to have more information, let's go for it. I started this as the sketch, I feel like it's been like 2 years ago now or something. And eventually emboldened myself enough to put it on a large piece of paper, the size, a little bigger, and just layering in watercolor, and then I maybe got 70% of the way. I thought it was done. And I stopped working on it for about half a year, maybe more. And then I finally pushed it to this shortly before the show. And I'm very happy I did so, because it was staring at me in the studio for so long. It was really annoying me. And I felt that there was something there that just needed to be in this physical, like, three-dimensional sense on the wall. But the concept is, it harkens to this, again, fairly universal myth of the Selkie, or the seal woman, or the mermaid, maybe. They're a very compatible concept. The story of the woman, the essence of the woman returning to her soul self, her inner self, her deepest, truest, wildest, most natural self, and having her own way about going about that, her own ritual to do that, to connect in that way. So it's a homecoming. It's a soul returning, as it were. And this just depicts a bit of a ritual to get into the mindset of doing that for her. And again, this is one where I don't need to be the figure there. Like, it doesn't have to be a likeness. It wasn't meant to be me specifically, but I did use myself just, again, for convenience as a physical figure reference. I just tied a ribbon around myself. This is one of my jewelry items. This is a dress, and I just did that in my studio space with my stuff, my my mortar and pestle and my knife and my skull.
Is that a bear skull?
It's a seal skull.
It's a seal skull.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, to hearken to this concept of the woman, she comes from the sea, her depths, her natural self, her most wild self.
It's a gnarly skull for a seal.
Yeah, right? Those fangs. Those fangs. And she comes to land, and she has a ritual to return and to visit humans and to connect and to make a relationship, and then to go back to herself. So that's what that reference is.
It's a beautiful painting. I mean, like the color relationships in it, the saturations in it, the choices to be loose and expressive or like really tight and controlled. Yeah, it's got this great energy in it, and like I always, when I think about artists who like played that off really well, like I always think of John Singer Sargent. When the piece would just be a complete mess of marks, but then all of a sudden turn into this gorgeous hand or this like really defined silhouette portrait, or like he would choose to focus on just like this like bright like this flower that would somehow enhance the portrait. Like I feel like that's happening a lot in this painting particularly. Like there's moments where it completely blows away. Like this tree I mean, absolutely just turns back into the twilight sky behind it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you know, you come down a half an inch and you move over a little bit, and oh no, that's bark. Like that's just the color relationship that's happened. And
Smoke's kind of
yeah,
leaving
absolutely.
it.
Like you can move around the piece with a single color and come back to itself, but then find so much in between. And I think that's, to me, that's like, it's such a an awesome, you know, compliment to your ability to be able to like guide us around a piece and back in and find like really like beautiful little gems along the way. I think it's just a gorgeous painting.
I think I'm just realizing this now, but because of what you said. But again, at Waldorf, when I hated doing those veil paintings, that was a principle that we were taught all the time, was work in the colors, you know, spread it around the painting. And I think that's kind of intuitively, again, what I did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think when you finally recognize what local color means, it's like, oh, like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. It's a big deal. So
Yeah,
I think the
very
painting itself
relevant.
is just gorgeous.
thank you.
Yeah.
That was, I fought a bit with that one, but I loved applying the palette, and I just like creating these textures.
I think artwork, it ought to be a struggle a little bit.
Oh,
I feel like if you just go in the studio and they all just come out like just as you meant it all the time, like it gets a little tiresome. Like I feel like a piece should fight back a little
Yeah.
bit.
It shows itself
Yeah.
in that fight. Yeah. It reveals itself. Yeah. So that'll happen a lot more. Lots of fighting to come as I uncover my preferences and my journey with paint. But yeah,
Beautiful.
I think the next two for paintings, larger, very daunting paintings, will be this piece, The Fates, and then Rosary. And then I have a new series coming out. It's just it's a triptych. There are 3 pieces. They all relate to one another. It's inner landscapes, again, speaking to this idea of the inner and the outer world connected. So it's coming up.
Oh, we'll be happy to look for it. So do we have any other questions for Mairin-Taj before we call it an evening? Yeah, please.
The whole exhibition, the style is similar, except this piece here, it seems like a standalone.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is like the coloration that is absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thank
And I
you.
love obviously everything else, but it's just interesting that I can see that your experimentation doesn't differentiate too much with like, especially the roses and the selfie piece.
Yeah.
That's a standalone piece. What's going on there with like, because it seems like is that the latest piece, or is that straight from your sketches?
Yeah, this one, this is like the 3rd stage of 3 stages that I fairly succinctly made it. So it's really relating to the drawing. And the sketches, it's about 5 by 7 in that sketchbook.
Right.
I made the drawing. I just got the portraits pointed down. I didn't really know what I was doing here. I went back to the drawing in about a week or 2, finalized it, blew it up, printed it out, blew it up, and then just turned it into a painting. And I think it was just very accessible to me. And so I think that I had already made this one.
Right.
So I think what I loved about this texture and the palette work and just like kind of playing with what essentially felt and looked like to me earth, like this in here, like I was just like working with earth kind of to bring it to light. It just happened really fast, I think.
Yeah.
It just happened really fast. And it is one of the last. It wasn't the last, but it was towards the end. Yeah.
I just wonder if that's where you're heading and you're favouring that.
Oh.
Because that looks, even though it's based in mythology, it's fantastical, let's say. In some respects, it's also quite realistic. Seeing that kind of those tones, in paintings before, and the roses, there's a realism there. But that one's just a stretch into something else, into something a bit more subtle, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this actually, some of the technique was something that I have played with in the past. Like when I look at this one, I was like, oh, that came about kind of the way that I did years and years ago. I did this piece when I was in Buffalo. It was called Hoth, New York, as in Hoth, the ice planet from Star Wars, New York, because Buffalo is known to be like that kind of crazy white witchery and ridiculous. So I had like a woman in a Star Wars suit, but with a shovel, and she was like surrounded by snow, and there was one of those walkers behind her. And it was this size, and it was kind of made in this way, and this is mostly acrylic actually. So the same texture, the same kind of layering, the same black exterior, so like a black ground surrounding the main piece. So I kind of hearkened to that when I made this, and I think that once in a while or whenever it seems most appropriate, I will kind of work in that way. So it's definitely a way to work, yeah. I don't know if I'm going in this direction, but it's something that I think I will tie in.
I also feel like there's a level of abstraction in that piece that's not evident in your others as well.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, like abstraction in the sense that it's the shape language is really strong. Like it's paying attention to this like circular cutout, this like almost kind of passageway rectangularness of it, and it's almost it's styled in a way that, and I'm hesitant to use that word, styled, but
Sure.
maybe it's just kind of directed in that way, like the shape is just as important as the figure inside it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, there's kind of a keyhole quality that.
Yeah, a keyhole is a great way to think of it.
Yeah, I think I liked it too. I was drawn to that also just because of the meaning, again, for me, that it had this sort of like looking into the deeper, darker depths as something sort of precious and becoming for myself. This becoming moment of, you know, that meaning of like the mother and this is a riff on the mother and child concept, but with archaic ideas behind it from a contemporary woman, which I love. I love that juxtaposition in that play. But also like these like very graphic structures that you were talking about. I think part of that also might have to do with how like I merged my personal face very gently with the actual face of the Hathor sculptures on the Hathor temple in Egypt. So Hathor, the goddess, is portrayed in this way with the cow ears, and her face is much more wide, but I was merging it with mine, so it's a little different. And then this is me, this is my image from when I was a child, so that's me as well. But the Hathor concept, like the way she is as a statue on the temple, and then like this keyhole like relief structure has that temple quality to it almost.
Yeah.
So I think that all of those things come together to make it look.
Well, it makes a great deal of sense because I mean, like ancient Egyptian art is all about geometry. It's about like a two-dimensional plane, but kind of creating this narrative and this story in it.
Yeah.
And they relied heavily on shape and color and form to kind of carry that conversation. That's awesome.
Oh, it's fun.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks so much for joining us this evening, and thank you to our visitors online as well. We appreciate you spending your evenings with us. And